Doreen 𝗏𝗏𝗧 is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen 𝗏𝗏𝗧.
Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗧.
Dr. Doreen 𝗏𝗏𝗧.
Dr. Doreen 𝗏𝗏𝗧 is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. Okay, somebody wrote in and said my son, 6, a male, I think, friend, 7 male, is autistic. I'm not sure where he is on the spectrum. And he asks me nonstop questions when he's at our house. It's overwhelming. One random question after the other. This is my new neighbor. He did this to me the other day. And his 2 grown sons were, and he just kept asking me questions. And I said, you ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And his sons roared. They were like, oh my gosh, he totally does. But anyway, this person says, and I get really frustrated, how can I redirect the friend out of the question mode?
Yeah, so the individual asking questions is on the spectrum?
Well,
Trying to
first they say
understand.
autistic, and then they say, I'm not sure where he is on the spectrum. So I think
Right.
autistic,
Yeah.
yes.
So sometimes people with autism will ask a lot of questions because they are trying to interact. And they don't realize that, generally speaking, in social communication, we ask a question, receive an answer, allow the other person to ask a question. There's like this kind of, you know, it's not written down anywhere, but we all know to take turns. And that doesn't always happen, and they are curious, and they're trying to interact, and so they will ask back-to-back questions. And so there are many different things you can do. One way to handle this is just simply when the individual comes in and starts to ask questions, you just tell them right off the bat, how many questions are we going to do today?
Yeah.
Let's do 3.
Yeah.
And then they're allowed to ask 3 questions. Just hold your fingers up and allow them, and then say, okay, that's it, now it's my turn, and I will do that. Or you don't even have to say, now it's my turn. If you don't want to interact, you'll say, now we're going to do 5 minutes of silence, you know, and set a timer.
Yeah.
So it's not offensive to the end. A lot of times people don't say those things because they think they might be offending the person. You're
Yeah.
not. You are teaching them the rules of social communication, and actually you're helping them in that sense, because then they will take that rule and apply it to other scenarios.
Yeah. And I love that, you know, you're saying that it is their way of trying to communicate with you. I think there's something about when you understand that piece of it.
Yes.
I have a much beloved member of our family that the way they reach out and communicate with people to start is by asking questions like, when is your birthday? Or things like that, because that is
Yes.
what they have memorized to ask. And,
Yes,
and it drives me a
yes.
little crazy that there are people in our family that don't go any further than that.
Yes.
Like they don't volley back, like they'll just answer the question and then they don't ask the child back a question. And I pointed that out recently. I said, you know, that's their way of trying to start a conversation with you.
Right.
And you know, I think when you realize, oh, is that what's happening? Then you can come into the conversation a lot more effectively with them.
Absolutely. And sometimes, and that's another really good point that you bring up, Shannon, is that sometimes it's not that they're asking 100 different questions. Sometimes they will ask the same question over and over.
Yes.
And that's, you know, also important to point out and say, nope, you already asked that.
Yeah.
And ask me a different question. And actually asking a different question is a whole lesson that we have written up. And I think a lot of times it's just important, like I said, we don't specifically give these instructions or directions because we feel we might be embarrassing the other individual. Yeah. But the truth is that if you do actually give those rules, often it helps. And sometimes you might need to write the rules down or show them with some form of visual. Like, we are going to ask 3 questions. 1, okay, I answer that. 2, okay, now it's my turn to ask a question. Those types of things. So it just depends why the individual is doing that. Often it's just because they're trying to communicate.
You know, is it the Vineland where you have to answer those horrible questions as a parent, where you have to sit there, oh, I hate that test. But I remember in the beginning when we used to have to do the Vineland, and it would say, you know, there was the one where it was, does your child, if you ask them a question, how many volleys back and forth? I don't remember how they worded it. How many exchanges
right.
back and forth, and how many words in a sentence? And I remember when the answer to all of it was not applicable because there was nothing, right? And then gradually that got added, and it was like we almost started working our way down the sheet with answers to thing. And so there was a time when I remember a grandmother complaining to me about her 4-year-old granddaughter, and she said, oh gosh, she's 4, and you know what that's like. You have a 4-year-old. They just ask questions endlessly. And I went, oh,
how lovely.
Because he wasn't asking questions, right? And all I wanted was for him to ask questions.
Yeah.
Then when he was like 6, all of a sudden there were the questions endlessly, and a lot of times it was the same question, and I had to remember, oh, I used to wish for this. But I remember the big one, we'd be driving in the car and he would say to me, what's for dinner?
Yeah.
And I would tell him, you know, and then be 10 seconds later and he'd say, Mom, what's for dinner?
Yeah.
And you guys taught me to say, you know, I answered that, asked and answered was what we eventually got to. I'd say, answered that, what else do you want to ask me? And then you guys taught me, because sometimes I would say back to him, because we were working on memory too, I would say, I just told you, do you remember what I said? And he would say, I forgot.
Yes.
So then what we started doing is he would ask me what's for dinner, and I would say chicken and mashed potatoes. And then I would wait a second and I would say, what did I just ask you? What did I just tell you was for dinner? And he would go, chicken and mashed potatoes.
Exactly.
So then when he would ask me, he would say, what's for dinner? And I would say, I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah.
And he would say chicken and mashed potatoes. And then I would ask him a question, or I would say to him, ask me a different question.
Yes, yes.
And then we got to the point where, because everybody always says, how do you get to conversation? But that was along the way.
One way, yeah, yeah.
You know?
And this is a very good thing you're talking about here, because I often see that our kids, so this is another whole thing that could be happening with some of our kids. So they, you know, remember the whole concept of prompt dependence, right?
Yes.
And that sometimes our kids learn that they can depend on you to give them the answer. And so when you give them an answer the first time, they don't really pay attention to it because they can depend on you to give them the answer again.
This is
And
my
so-
husband.
well,
This is my husband.
I mean, it's a lot of us, right? A lot of people, and as time goes on, we also have learned to like kind of not pay attention. Like, you know, we're distracted. There's a
Yes.
million things that
Yes.
distract us. So that becomes a really important thing to teach your child, is that when I give you the answer the first time, you need to be really focused on paying attention on it, to it. And so the way that you did that is perfect, where you would give the answer and actually ask the child, what did I just say, so that they repeat it, so that they remember it. Or, I mean, a lot of times you'll just tell the child, and you can also say, now remember that. Or you can tell the child to write it down if they're hyperlexic. Or you can tell the child, you know, I'm going to ask you that question again, so remember. Like, you can give them ways to remember it, and that will really actually help the child in processing information. Because sometimes our kids will ask a question and they don't process the response that you've given to them.
Yeah.
And that is, then they keep asking over and over again because they kind of depend on you to prompt it.
Yeah.
So you have to teach the child to give themselves ways to keep it in, and this is a memory deficit, right? So you're allowing the child to, you're teaching the child to expand their memory by doing various things, either repeating it, writing it, thinking about it, that sort of thing.
Don't forget, you can watch Ask Dr. Doreen live every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We hope to see you there.